Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our program here on radio.com on the 8th day of January, a Wednesday, as we are each and every day here at 5 o'clock until 6, and then we're joined, of course, at 6 we hook up with WFN in New York till 6:30. In the days to come, as I promised you when we first announced we would do this, we're going to do varied things here in this 5 to 6 o'clock hour on radio.com. We will do a thing called Decision 20, which will be about the presidential election. That will be separate. That will be self-contained. We'll really start that when we get to the primaries, so we're still a couple of weeks away of that. That will really start once we get to the primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire to get things started, the caucuses and the primaries to be exact. So that's to come. We also will do some different things, like may do some movie stuff and some different things on different days. So it won't just be sports all the time, but obviously, primarily, most days it will be sports, and the sports part of it will be self-contained. Anything we do that's non-sports will be completely separate so that we don't integrate the sports with any of the political stuff especially, or really with any of the other stuff that we might do. So there are days we will branch out and do some very different things. Busy day in sports today, and just hearing minutes ago that George Perlis died. Now, if you don't know the name George Perlis, and you might be young enough that it's a name you don't remember, George Perlis was one of the architects of the great Steeler defense that won 4 Super Bowls under Chuck Noll. He was an assistant under Chuck Noll. He was a defensive coordinator for the Steelers, and he was one of the architects of the great vaunted steel curtain. The Steelers, when they went 4-0 under Noll and won the 4 Super Bowls that they did in the 70s, for 6 years as dominant as any team has ever been in the history of the NFL, they won the first 2 completely, without any question, with very little contribution from the offense, but with a defense that was as good as any defense that ever played the game. That's how good the early Steeler defense was in the 70s when they got good. And, of course, you're talking about guys like Mean Joe Green and all the great players that played throughout the ranks, Ham, and I mean, I can go down the list. They're all in the Hall of Fame. So there's so many of them that, but the bottom line is that's how they won the first 2 Super Bowls. The second pair of Super Bowls were really won with the offense. They were won with Bradshaw to Swan and Bradshaw to Stallworth, including the one against the Rams where they played the final one. They played the Rams and Ray Malavasi's 9-7 team that actually led the Steelers as huge underdogs, led the Steelers 19-17 going to the fourth quarter. But 2 big plays in the fourth quarter turned the game around, and the Steelers went on to a 31-19 win over the 9-7 Rams that year. And the Rams had missed an extra point, which turned out to be a very big extra point because the Steelers won by 12, and the line in that game was 11.5. So it turned out to be a very, very big extra point. But George Perlis went on to coach Michigan State. He did a very good job at Michigan State. Had some very solid teams there, as you would expect defensively, and running the ball with guys like Lorenzo White and the like. So did a very good job at Michigan State, and one of the real big names from the 70s in football. So George Perlis, after a very full life, passes away at the age of 85. As we see this, I'm still watching as Mike McCarthy is still taking questions with Stephen Jones on one side and Jerry Jones on the other side as he becomes the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. It's been a whirlwind couple of days with McCarthy going to the Cowboys. Of course, we know Matt Rule jumping to Carolina for an astronomical amount of money. I mean, you have a guy who's never coached a game in the NFL, who spent 1 year of his life in the NFL as an assistant. 1. Who coached at Temple and Baylor, and now is, I believe, either the fifth or the sixth highest paid NFL coach after signing what was an astronomical contract. But when you have a Wall Street guy like Tepper, who is now there, who wants to get a certain guy, he doesn't let money stand in the way. So he clearly, he drummed out of Rule's head any idea of coaching the Giants by making sure his offer was just such a big one and his vision for the future is such a rich one in a variety of ways. Hey, he'll pay me and he'll build what I want to build. If I want a state-of-the-art projection room, I'm getting it. If I want state-of-the-art weight room, I'm getting it. If I want to spend money on assistant coaches and facilities and this and that, I'm getting it. Now, remember, when it comes to players, everybody's restricted by the same numbers. The salary cap this year will go over $200 million. It should be somewhere around $202 million, which is an amazing number when you think about it. But it should be somewhere right around there. But there's no money. There's no restrictions on what else you spend. So some teams like the Bengals spend very, very little on anything. And some teams spend a whole lot of money on everything. They do everything first class, like the Niners used to do with the Bartolo. And they can go out and spend a lot of money on coaches. The coaching money is not restricted in any way. So you can pay anything you want for a coach. There's no rules. There's absolutely no rules. And that's why the numbers that we have with coaches are not always the most accurate, because there's no official numbers that have to be put anywhere, because they don't matter. They do list coaches' numbers, but that doesn't mean they're totally accurate. You don't know every side deal that a guy might have with an owner. A player can't have a side deal with an owner. It's illegal. We know that. We know the Niners tried to fool with some stuff years ago, trying to give players, money for charitable foundations and stuff that really was looking to circumvent the salary cap, and they obviously were penalized for that. But with the coach, you can do whatever you want. And not only that, you can also spend money in a variety of ways. Facilities matter. And modern coaches worry about practice facilities. They worry about training facilities. They worry about having state-of-the-art advancement in terms of how they care for their players, how they train their players, how they teach their players, in every regard, how they travel. All of that can be moderate or it can be extravagant. And in the case of Carolina, it looks like it will be first class all the way in the years to come. That moved the Giants to scramble. They wanted Rule. Listen, let them tell you whatever they want. It doesn't matter. They wanted Rule, and then they scrambled, and they landed on Judge, and they did it very, very quickly. And Judge, a name that not a lot of New York fans knew. Not a lot of even solid fans knew the name. But now they're learning what he's about, and they will learn more in the days to come as they get to meet him as he is announced as the head coach of the Giants, which leaves only the Browns looking to name a coach. You have, obviously, Ron Rivera in Washington. He went there very quickly. Solid guy. Not a great coach, but a solid guy and a solid citizen, and a guy who, will do a pretty good job. I mean, I think he's proved he can win when he has the talent. I don't think he's a great coach, but I don't think he's a bad coach by any stretch of the imagination. And I think he gives that franchise, which has been in need of credibility, a chance to have credibility in the years to come. And that's something that has been missing dramatically in Washington for a while. But now McCarthy takes over, having won 6 division titles in 13 seasons as the head coach of the Packers. Things got sour there the last couple of years. Listen, that's not always a reflection on how a man coaches. A voice can get tuned out. I remember when the Lakers tuned out Pat Riley. I mean, completely tuned him out to the point of getting swept in a series to get rid of him. It happens. You can have a great coach. I don't think McCarthy's a great coach, but I think he's a qualified, solid coach. I think he's a winning coach in the NFL. And you can have a good coach or a great coach, and it's still, he can have a point where he wears out an organization. Not just wears out the players, because the players change. You might have 1 or 2 players who are really good, who are with you the whole time you're in Green Bay. But other than having a special quarterback or a longtime offensive lineman, it's very rare to have a guy who gets up to 12 years in the NFL. And talking about years, that leads us to the next piece of business, which, of course, is Tom Brady, who today made some news again by letting everybody know that he expects to be back in the NFL next year. Now, as I mentioned this morning on a 5-Minute Morning, I have seen and heard a lot of expressions the last couple of days from people inside the league and outside the league that the Patriot dynasty is dead. And the only thing I will say about that is I just think it's extremely premature. One season where they don't get their bye in the final week because they lose to a bad Dolphin team, and then lose in the first round of the playoffs at home. It's not a good year for them, of course not. It's not a good finish for them, of course not. But to me, I have to see three things happen before I would say that the dynasty as we know it, that has dominated the AFC East, which has dominated the AFC, which has dominated the NFL, that dynasty, I think, is not gone until three things happen. And none of them have to do with Belichick, because I don't think Belichick's going anywhere. I think the dynasty could be over with Belichick still there. I don't think he has to leave. That would obviously end it, but I don't think he has to leave for it to be over, and I don't think he's leaving. So what would be the things that would indicate that it's over? Well, the first would be obviously Tom Brady moving on. That would be ending the dynasty as we know it. I think then you can then expect them to go through a transition period with a new quarterback. It would probably be a quarterback that they develop, and I think that there would be clearly a transition period. The second would be if you see them allow a lot of these premier defensive players to leave. Now, the Pats have always been willing to lose a player a year early rather than a year late, which means they won't give that veteran who they think has 1 year left a big 3-year deal so they can basically sit on the back end of a deal and get crushed by it. They don't allow their team performance to be crushed by bad contracts. They have always got Brady to sign for less than he's worth, and they have passed on and said goodbye to a lot of guys because they were going to be sitting on big contracts. Now, I think they will pay Brady because I think Belichick would want to, but more than anything else, I think Kraft will want to. Kraft wants Brady back. I don't think there's no doubt in my mind that Kraft wants Brady to retire in a Patriot uniform. Now, whether he will or not remains to be seen. But the second thing would be if I saw key defensive guys being let go when their contracts were reasonable or they still had a lot of gas in the tank. And I haven't seen that yet. And the third would be a subtle thing. Now, we see assistant coaches leave the Pats year after year, whether it was Charlie Weiss, whether it was Mangini, whether it was Romeo Crennel, whether it was any of the recent guys, any of the guys now, any of the assistants, leading right up to McDaniel and Judge, any of them, and none of it bothers me. There are two Hall of Fame coaches in New England. The first, obviously, is the head coach. The other one is the offensive line coach and the assistant head coach. And his name, of course, is Dante Scarnecchia. You hear me reference him many times. If Scarnecchia is allowed to retire without them putting up an enormous fuss. Now, he left and retired a few years ago. And after they lost that game and got beat up in Denver by that Denver defense, and Tom took a beating that day, Belichick talked him out of retirement to rebuild that line, and we know what has happened since. Scarnecchia is one of the great coaches in the modern NFL. He is probably one of the storied assistants in the history of the sport. Parcells thought the world of him. Belichick thinks the world of him. Everybody who's ever worked with him, players, coaches, anybody who comes in contact with him, thinks the world of him, and he makes a difference. He is that good. And I'm telling you, these guys believe that Skornecki, guys like Belichick, Parcells, believe that Skornecki is on their level as a coach. That rarefied level that very few reach, and they don't think a lot of guys belong there. They think that Dante Skornecki does. They have a world of respect for him. As long as he's there, as long as he hasn't decided to go play with the grandkids again, I think the dynasty lives. So unless you see the defenders leave, Brady leave, and Skornecki leave, until those things happen, and none of them have happened yet, then I think it's way, way too early to discount or think for a second that this dynasty's over. I could see them quickly doing the things they did wrong this year. They did not replace Gronkwell. They did not do a good job in coming up with answers along as far as the offensive line went, and of course as far as wide receiver went. They didn't draft right. They didn't do well in free agency. They made a mistake with Antonio Brown, which was costly, and they lacked firepower. They couldn't get separation. People took Edelman away, and the offensive line wasn't responding, and you had an offense that, as you saw, got shut out at home by the Tennessee. And Tennessee's got a nice defense, but they don't have a defense that should shut you out. Clearly, Henry's doing a great job, and he keeps opposing offenses off the field by moving the chains, but there's no way they should be shutting anybody out. And we know how that game turned and how dramatically that game turned from the last couple of minutes of the first half when the Pats were about to go up 10 points and could have gone into the half up 17-7. And that's where they have always made their run. In the final couple of minutes of the first half and into the first possession of the second half, they usually pull away in that spot. Sometimes they'll make up 7 to 10 points in that spot. Instead of going into this game 17-7 up, which they had a first and goal with inside of 4 minutes in the first half. They had a first and goal from the 1. They don't score. They have to settle for a field goal. So instead of 17, they have 13, and then Tennessee comes down the field with Henry making every single, or virtually every yard. I think he might have made all but about 5 or 6 yards on the drive. And instead of it being 17-7 Tennessee, and the Pats are in very good shape, they're down 14-13 at the half, and we all know what happens after that. So it changed things radically, but I do not believe that this dominance that they have had for as long as they have had, I don't think there's any way you can tell me that it's over completely. Now, the Giants will introduce Joe Judge at a press conference tomorrow at 2 o'clock, so it'll be bells and whistles tomorrow, and a big day in New York. Whenever the football Giants are going to name a head coach, you know that it's going to be a big day. And so the 38-year-old, who is a guy who, comes from the SEC, learned his football at Alabama, and spent a lot of time with the Patriots, comes through the Saban camp, comes through the Belichick camp, and now becomes the head coach of the Giants before he's 40. That is impressive, and he'll get a chance to say hello to New York and the metropolitan area and the entire league tomorrow with a press conference at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And then all that will be left is Cleveland. And Cleveland is still interviewing a bunch of folks, whether it's McDaniel or whether it's Stefanski or whether it's somebody else that we haven't thought about yet. They should have a coach by the weekend, and then the league will be right back. It's a remarkable thing when you think about it. If you look at the league, there are about 8 places where they have had a coach in place more than 5 years, and they're happy with what's going on right now. That's about a quarter of the league. When you take out the fact that you have an iconic figure in New England, and you know that the average tenure of a Steeler coach is about 17 years. They've had 3 coaches in the last 50 years. You take those two franchises out, and you realize it's just a handful of franchises that have guys that have been in place right now. Think about the other teams that have guys who are there 10 years. Harbaugh's been there 10 years. Pete Carroll's been there 10 years. Even Andy Reid, who is really one Super Bowl away from being in the Hall of Fame and really has Hall of Fame credentials right now and has won over 200 games. Even he had to change jobs because they got tired of his act in Philadelphia, despite all the winning, but they didn't get over the top there with him. You know, they had a lot of tough losses in title games, in NFC title games, and, of course, a tough loss by 3 points to the Pats in the Super Bowl. But he now has found another home, as he did quickly in Kansas City. But think about it. It's about 75% of the league that will turn over every 5 years or less. And if you're the Giants, you're hoping that the fact that you have had to do it twice in the last couple of years, that you haven't been able to move on from Coughlin and what Coughlin brought. And the years that Coughlin brought here were, I know at the end, tough to take, but for the most part, when you have a run that adds 2 Super Bowl wins as underdogs against the team that has been the dynasty, that's a special run, a special tenure, and that's what Coughlin brought to the job, despite the fact that he went out with 3 straight losing seasons at the end. Yeah, that spoiled things. We know that. We know that it kind of left things and kind of has led to the demise and the spin that has gone on and the, trip to the bottom that the Giants have taken in recent years. But hopefully that's all over now and they will start to move in the right direction, and maybe they have found this guy who wasn't their first choice, but again, so many times the right guy wasn't the first guy. It doesn't mean the first guy's the right guy. You just got to hit on the right guy, and hopefully the Giants have found someone who can, lay down roots and be here for a while and be the kind of coach that this team can win with and be proud of, because it's been a long time coming for the football Giants. So tomorrow at 2 o'clock, it'll be a big day for the city and for football fans, as the Giants will judge their new head coach at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Back after this. All right, we're back here on this Wednesday program on radio.com. The Mike's On program on radio.com. Now, we're moving towards the divisional playoff come this weekend, the 4 big games as we head towards the weekend. And it looks like some of the guys who were big factors over in last week's victories may be issues this week. One of the things you have to do if you're going to win. And first, let me see if there's been any movement as far as this week's games go, as far as lines or anything like that. I don't think there has been from Tuesday to Wednesday. But one of the things you have to do if you're going to win in these games is you have to hope that your key guys are going to stay healthy, and keeping these guys healthy to get through a run where you're going to be able to put together 2 or 3 games in a row is not an easy chore by any stretch of the imagination. And as an example, I got some key guys here already who you have to be concerned about here this early in the week now. As far as the movement, no movement in the lines from yesterday to today. The Niners are still a 7-point choice over the Vikings. The Ravens are an 8.5-point choice over the Titans on Saturday night. On Sunday, the Chiefs, who opened at 8, went right to 9.5, and 9.5-point favorites over the Texans. And the Packers are 4-point favorites over the Seahawks. Now, a couple of key guys, Thielen, who made the great catch and is such a big factor for the Vikings, has trouble again with the ankle. Did not practice today. Don't know how much he will practice with the ankle injury this week. And that is a major, major problem. If they don't have him, that is a big, big problem. The other thing is Diggs, who is always a problem. I mean, he's an emotional guy. He's never happy. He's always complaining about something. You saw him on the sideline. Uh, he missed practice with an undisclosed illness. Now, Zimmer, who's a no-nonsense type, said, hey, he'll be fine. I'm promising you he'll be fine. But you never know, because clearly, if you remember in the first half, Diggs was visibly upset that he hadn't been targeted in the game. This is the guy, when he doesn't get the ball, he starts complaining, he starts moaning, he starts groaning. You've seen a lot from him. You know he can be a pain in the neck, but you also know he can be an important player for them if they can get Diggs, running his routes and just get his head in the game. He can be a factor, and they need Thielen in the worst way. That is a guy who does a terrific job and is a critical guy for them. Now, they do have a healthy Cook, which is the most important thing of all, because when they don't have Cook, their line can't stand up to the Niners. Now, if the Niners are healthy completely, and we don't know that they are yet either, if they are, they're going to pose a lot of problems for the Vikings with their pass rush. And one of the big things is getting Cook out on the edge and letting him make plays there so that you can take some of the pressure off your quarterback instead of Cousins having to throw the ball 50 times. If you can limit that, get him to throw the ball off play action, throw the ball on some second and third and shorts, that makes it a whole different game. And that's why Cook, who had a terrific game last week against the Saints, is critical. And Zimmer made the point, and he went into that Saints game very confidently, I mean extremely confidently, that he thought Cook was aided dramatically by missing a couple of games late in the season, allowed him to recharge his batteries, and said at practice last week he was unstoppable, and you saw how well he played in the game. He's healthy. He came out of the game healthy. Some of these other guys didn't, which is an issue. Now, the other one is for Seattle, and this is big. Last week, and we know how beat up the Eagles were. We know how beat up they were on the offensive line, at wide receiver. We can go down the list, tight end. And then to lose their quarterback the way they did. But Clowney disrupted the game dramatically for them last week for Seattle. He went over there. They expected big things out of him. He gave it to him. He has a core. What used to be, now they call it a core injury. It used to be what they called a sports hernia. Okay? It's a tricky injury to have for a football player because it doesn't heal very well. You can sneeze and you can hurt it again. Well, he has a core problem right now, and that's a big problem because this Seattle defense, they need Clowney to play in a very big way for them to have a chance this week. They need Clowney to put some pressure and to be disruptive on this Packer offense. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very tough. And he was that in a big way last week, and it made a difference. Now, obviously, they didn't have their quarterback. McCown was able to get them, was able to move him between the 20s. He just wasn't able to move him after he got the ball to the 20 into the end zone last week. It wasn't like he did a terrible job, but again, it's not a situation where you can ask a backup quarterback to be able to step in there and do that kind of job, especially a guy who's been around a while and is, coaching high school football early in the season. But Clowney made a big difference in the game. They would miss him if he wasn't healthy. And you're also waiting for a couple of key guys on the Niners. I haven't heard the Niners give any reports yet about how healthy they are. But it's also interesting to see that the teams that ran the ball well this year and ran the ball extremely well, as we know Baltimore did. You have a running quarterback and you have a two-headed running attack there that worked very well. But teams like Tennessee, right at the top. So these teams here that have had success, Minnesota running the ball, Tennessee running the ball, Baltimore running the ball, Seattle running the ball, have had a lot of success this year. Now Seattle's already down 3 running backs. That's why they hope to put a little more pressure on Marshawn Lynch this week. Not just around the goal line, not just in the red zone, put a little more pressure on him this week. So these teams that have run the ball well are finding success. So it's not just about the pass, and it's not just about wide open football and having the quarterback. You're seeing teams where the running back is featured. Cook in Minnesota and Henry in Tennessee, and those guys making a big difference in these games. So, I mean, you always look for balance from good teams. You want a team that can do both. You know, some of the great teams, whether you're talking about the great Niner teams, the great Cowboy teams, they were able to run the ball and pass the ball. You know, Bill Walsh in an interview once told me, I asked him what the perfect offense was, and he said 250 yards passing. And this was in a little different era before the passing numbers got crazy. 250 yards passing, 150 yards running was the perfect game for his offense. That was optimum. That was playing in his mind to statistical perfection. 250 passing, 150 rushing, which is a pretty significant amount of running yards, which means you're getting easy throws off play action, which means you're getting the downs that put so much stress on a defense, second and short, third and short, especially second and short, which puts an incredible amount of pressure on a defense. So we'll update the injuries again tomorrow, but those are a couple of key guys who you have to be concerned about in a big way, especially as you head towards this week. The teams that didn't play last week, they worry about whether they lost a little bit of that rhythm. They worry about whether they lost some of that stuff they had where they were playing so well. That's always a little bit of a fear when you're playing as well as, say, Baltimore was. And you had a pretty healthy team. And you say, hey, we hated backing down. We want to be out there every week and play every week. And that's the argument to the other side. If one of those teams gets beat now, they all talk about, you know what, we couldn't knock the rust off. We get out of our rhythm, blah, blah, blah. So you hear that sometimes. And that's why in recent years, where it's gotten easier to win on the road, it clearly has. You see teams get on a roll. And then using a physical brand of play, which is what you're seeing now from Tennessee, which is what you saw last week from Minnesota, a physical brand of play, both ways, offensively and defensively. And that can sometimes be the difference because you get the hot hand, you get a rhythm going, and it doesn't matter that you've played the extra game. You go in and you're ready to go, and the team that took a week off takes them a little while to get their battery started and get their rhythm back and sometimes it's a little bit of a detriment. So you do hear that, but you'd rather still be the team that didn't have to play last week and be the home team. Statistically, that team is usually still the better team and the winner. You know, one thing as I watch as McCarthy's still speaking, this might be the longest press conference in history. It's Cowboys. What do you expect? Everything's big. They quietly made a great hire. You know they're bringing in Mike Nolan, who everyone knows. I think he's been everybody's defensive coordinator just about in the league by now. I mean, he's been around forever. His father was a prominent defensive coach. His father was a guy who coached with Tom Landry. But Mike Nolan is a defensive coordinator. But McCarthy got John Fossil as his special teams coordinator. Now, it's pretty much known throughout the league that John Fossil is the best special teams coach in the league. It's Jim Fossil's son, and he is a terrific special teams coach, and a special teams coach who I'm sure also thinks that he can ascend, and I'm sure he's all smiles, as all the special teams coaches are, because special teams coaches feel like they don't get enough attention. They also feel like they don't get a chance to interview for these jobs the way prominent offensive and defensive coordinators do. That's why Harbaugh dabbled in deep backs before he became a head coach, and why you saw Judge start to dabble in wide receivers, because they want to move out and branch out from just the special teams, because they feel like they don't get a chance to be the head coaches, despite their prowess as special teams coaches. And special teams coaches, as I mentioned yesterday, are very well versed in the whole team because they deal with everybody, because they take players from everywhere. And when you're deciding who's going to go to the game, a big part of that is, hey, your extra running backs, which ones you want to take. I need this one because he's good on special teams. Well, I might need this one because he's better on third down. No, I need this one because he's better on special teams. He's really good covering kicks and punts. That kind of decision goes back and forth where the head coach has to break the tie. The position coach wants to take this guy, The offense coordinator wants to take the guy that helps him, and the special teams guy wants to take the guy who helps him. Usually in those cases, extra wideouts, extra deep backs, extra linebackers, running backs. The special teams coach a lot of times will win that, especially in cities like New England where they care a great deal about special teams. I mean, you know that from the Parcells tree of coaching, that is something that he preached all the time. If I heard him say it once, I heard him say it a million times. Never take the foot out of football. Pass, punting, kickoffs, covering kicks, blocking kicks, making field goals, covering every inch of real estate there, swinging the game. And I know that before the game, in their pre-meetings, Belichick had told everybody that the best player on Tennessee was their punter. And if you remember, on Saturday night, he put on a show. And the Pats, who have won 2 battles all year, did not win either battle against Tennessee. Number one, they won the turnover battle all year. They had lost it twice. Once in the game where they led the Jets 30-0, and he put the backup quarterback in and he threw a pick six, and then they got another turnover for a touchdown, and then all of a sudden the Jets were looking like they were in the game at 30-14, but they had them down 30-0. Remember that? If you had bet the Pats tonight, you remember that because they didn't cover because of those turnovers. But that night they were -1. And then in the Tennessee game the other day, they were -1. But the rest of the year, they were plus. The other thing was they lost field position all night. That kicker deadened balls inside the 5, on the goal line, as he did at the end of the game when Tom threw the deflected ball that went for the pick six. He started that drive on the 1-yard line. So Kern was sensational. He's first-team All-Pro as the punter. He is a weapon unto himself, and the punter can be that. And it shows you how important those things are in those playoff games. Not turning the ball over, getting good field position, making that field goal. You can't have these 10 and 12 play drives and have the guy go up there and miss right with a 40-yard field goal. It takes the steam out of the building. It takes all the heart out of your team. Those are killers when that happens. Absolutely killers. Cannot have that happen. And when you get a punter where you decided not to go for it on 4th down. Instead, you decided to pin the team inside the 5, and your punter kicks it in the back of the end zone. You're like, what the heck did we just do that for? So he can really accentuate the game plan, and he can tilt the field, and Kern did that all night against the Pats. So they won the turnover battle, and they won the field position battle, and they won the special teams battle, and that's one of the reasons why they came out on top. That, and of course, the fact that Henry, pushed, ran over, and threw, and knocked down Pats on his way to 182 yards against a good defense. You can get 182 yards where it looked like guys got out of your way or a team couldn't set an edge. The Pats played soundly, and he got 182 yards. That says a lot. Back after this. All right, we're back here on radio.com on this Wednesday program. We'll be on WFAN straight up at 6 o'clock. Again, remember tomorrow at 2 o'clock, the Giant press conference to name Judge the new Giant head coach. So it'll be an exciting day in New York, and I will get you someone tomorrow who worked with Judge, who knows him really well, up on the program tomorrow. So I'm working on that right now. So a surprise guest who knows him real well, worked with him for a while. So I will provide that for you tomorrow. Now, a couple things on college basketball real quickly. Number one, kudos, if you didn't hear this yet, to Jay Wright being named the college basketball coach of the decade. How about that? I mean, we're not talking about coach of the year. We're talking about coach of the decade in college basketball. What an outstanding achievement. What an accomplishment. Now, we're partial to Jay Wright. He's a friend, but he also has done an incredible job at Villanova. He really has. He has put them up there as a consistent winner. They have been the beacon for the Big East. They have been the beacon for the newly established Big East. They've won 2 national championships, and many years I sat there, and fans, and rightly so, would call up and say, "Oh yeah, Jay's going to win 30 games, and he's going to go out in the second round," and that was happening. And one year they had gotten to a Final Four when they went to the 3-guard lineup that year and got to the Final Four. But for the most part, the team was winning games in the regular season. They were putting up 30-win seasons. And I had guys telling me that, we got to get rid of him. And that's always the fans' reaction. But when you have a guy winning 30 games, it is much easier for him to become a winner in the postseason than it is to go find another coach who's going to click off 30-win seasons for you. And what happens? All of a sudden, they become winners in the tournament. They go on and win a championship, turn around 2 years later and win another championship, are in the top 10 in college basketball for 6 straight seasons, have one of the best records of any college in the country during that time period, while playing in the Big East and playing Philadelphia basketball and playing, the teams in Philly and doing all the things that they have to do in terms of schedule and never shirking anything in terms of schedule, but still being able to put together a top 10 team every year. And that's an achievement. When you beat Mike Krzyzewski out for something, which he did for this award, that is saying something, because that's not easy to do. So kudos to Jay Wright for being named the AP college basketball coach of the decade, and richly deserved. And I thought a very big win for Villanova last night. They had lost to Butler on the road the other night. They've had some good wins in the regular season this year. They've had a couple of games that were not that impressive. It's a young team that's coming together. But last night, here they are on the road against Creighton with tough place to play, 17,000, really good home court, the whole thing. They're on the road, and they're looking at having back-to-back road losses. They're down 8 points at the half. They're down 8 points 10 minutes through the second half, and they come on, ratchet up the D on a night where the threes weren't falling for either team. Creighton will shoot the three. Villanova will shoot the three. Gillespie gets 24 points, makes big basket after big basket, and they go on to a win on the road at Creighton. So they lost a tough one to Butler. They turn around and win a big game at Creighton. That was a very big win. 24 points for Gillespie. Big win for Villanova. A very, very important win for them not to drop that game. Now, St. John's, you know what? The new coach has done a pretty solid job with this team this year. He really has. They had a pretty good non-conference. They beat Arizona. Now they've jumped into the Big East, and they've jumped into it in a tough spot. They really have. They're 11-4 overall, which is solid, but they've opened up with 2 big East losses at Xavier and at home to Butler. The Butler game, if you remember, St. John's got down like 20 points to Butler. And Butler's a good team. St. John's, with that press that they play now, the game that this coach plays, he was taught under Nolan Richardson. The whole 40 minutes of hell, the whole thing. We know what they like to do. They like to turn people over and play pressure defense. And they made a stirring comeback. They had like a 22-3 run, got the game back, and then lost a 2-pointer at home to Butler. A tough loss. That coming off a win against Arizona, which was a big win for the program. They turned around and lost at Xavier, which is not anything you have to hang your head about. Not easy to win at Xavier. Very, very tough to win at Xavier. Now they face Georgetown. Now Georgetown's been having its own problems. Opened up, lost at Providence, lost at Seton Hall, and Seton Hall's good. Rutgers is pretty good. Seton Hall's good. This is a big game for both these teams. We're looking at it from the St. John's standpoint, though. And this is a big game for St. John's tonight at Georgetown. It really is. This is a game you'd like to see them find a way to pull it out. I understand Georgetown's a little desperate, too. They could use a win in a worse way also. But you don't want to open up the Big East with 3 straight losses, having dropped the home game to Butler, then the one on the road to Xavier. If they turn around and drop this one here, that's a tough start after what was a promising preseason. I call it preseason, but not preseason, but, the non-conference part of the schedule. Now you're into the Big East part of the schedule after New Year's, leading up to the conference tournament. So you're into the second phase of the season. There's 3 phases, obviously, to your season. Your December schedule, and then your conference schedule, and then, of course, March, where you'll play your conference tournament. Hope you don't need that to get into the NCAA tournament, and then dream big dreams once you get to March. But this team, this St. John's team, is a team that, if it did things right, would have a chance. Nothing automatic. Would have a chance in what's a pretty competitive Big East. There's some good teams in this league. Seton Hall can play. Marquette can play. Obviously what Villanova can do. Great stuff. Butler's really tough. Xavier's a good league. Very good league. So with that being the case, it's not going to be easy by any stretch. And they're going to have to win some conference games here if they want to go to the Big East tournament. I mean, if they want to go to the NCAA tournament this year, which would be nice, they're going to have to get on a run. They had a pretty good preseason, early season non-conference schedule before they hit the Big East schedule. Now they need to see if they can win some conference games here, and that would be a step in the right direction. My theory has always been that I even give teams all of January. The season starts so early now in college basketball. They start playing. So it used to be they'd start playing Thanksgiving. Now they start playing the 10th of November. So you have almost 2 months of action before you hit January. So they are now different teams, even by January. It used to be you want them to go through the non-conference part of the schedule because some teams are going to play really rugged Decembers, and some teams are going to play, cupcakes Decembers and win all the games. And that's why teams will be 11-0, and you'll say, they're not any good. And someone will say, well, they're 11-0. Yeah, 11-0, they haven't played anybody. So you don't know based on record right now. You got to look and see who's played real games, who's played serious teams in the non-conference part of the schedule. Now you're into the conference part of the schedule. It's a grueling run. But this is where you have to try to get yourself qualified to get into the NCAA tournament. Otherwise, you're looking to make a deep, deep run in your conference tournament late in the season, and that's tough to do. You don't know if you're healthy enough. You don't know if you're deep enough. The ball can bounce the wrong way on you. So you don't want to leave it up to that. And this St. John's team probably needs another year, probably needs a couple of more players. But they did show some promise. They've kind of bought into the way this guy likes to play. I think in that regard, there has been a smooth transition for them. But they need to win some games. Starting this evening against Georgetown, they need to win some games. Otherwise, they're going to dig themselves a very, very deep hole in the Big East. And like I said, it's a league that has some depth. It's a league that's got some quality, and it won't be easy to make it to the NCAA tournament this year. And that's really got to be the goal. I mean, that's no matter who you are. If you're a program and you want to, listen, if you're a top 25 team, you're making the NCAA tournament easy. And my adopted team is back doing good things again this year after an off year. Wichita State had an off year last year. And we'll have Marshall on the program soon. But, that's always my team. And I love the way they play. And they're back playing. They're not to the level of the Van Vliet team yet. They don't have those kind of players yet. So they're not a team that I look at and say, hey, they're a sleeper to do some dangerous things. They can beat anybody in the country, like some of those Wichita teams, which have been put in terrible, terrible situations in the NCAA tournament. I mean, they have been treated so unfairly, and so has Kentucky. I mean, they seem to always find them each other, but they have, I think, both been treated terribly because they've squared them off in the second round of tournaments when they never should have. But this Wichita team is off to a very good start. It's had some really quality wins. It's gotten beat, all right? It's had some days where it hasn't shot the ball well. It's still got some things it needs to work out. But this is a team that is headed in the right direction, and it shows you how much basketball has changed. In the past, a guy like Marshall who has had this kind of success would be long out of Wichita State. But now, he never has to leave Wichita State. Wichita State can offer him everything that he wants. It can be a platform where he can recruit any kind of player. He gets paid what almost any coach would consider a king's ransom. He's getting that money in Wichita, Kansas, so it's not costing him much to find a house. It's not like he's paying, Beverly Hills prices or, Malibu prices for a house. So that's a big advantage. His buck goes a lot further there, living where he does. And he's been able to do everything that he wants to do. He doesn't need to go somewhere to win a national championship. He can win it there. He's made that program. He's branded that program into a legitimate, traditional power now in this country. It's where if you're a real basketball aficionado and you want to tick teams off, you're always going to mention them as a serious threat every year to be in the mix, because he's built that kind of program, and give him credit for that. He's a dynamic coach. He's a terrific coach. Works his team which I love, works his team really hard. They play really hard. They play the right way. And it's funny, during this time of year, once football's over, you can always see them because they have a pretty standing ritual. They play a lot of games at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday. So you can always find them. That's kind of become a big deal for them to kind of play that game at home where they sell out all the time. They play a lot of games there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, especially once football's over. And that's why I get a chance to see them a pretty good amount of time. They're on a lot now. I mean, you can pretty much find anybody now in college basketball just about anywhere. And you saw the statement that Roy Williams made about his team, which was kind of surprising. I mean, how little he thought of his team right now. Hey, you can have that kind of year. And it is a wide open year. Look how many different teams have been number one already. So it is a year where there's not one team. It is wide open. Absolutely wide open. Yeah, you'll wind up with 9 of 10 of the usual suspects. I mean, always. Nothing's going to change that radically. But it's going to be a good year. It's going to be a fun year. And it's, like I said, Villanova's back in the mix. They're ranked where they should be. Not as high as they've been in recent years, but still, right there inside 15. Had a couple of tough losses, but still getting better. I think they're going to get better as the year's going to progress. He's going to do a good job with his players that way. Watch out for Wichita, which I think is going to have another very good season. I think they have a chance to have a very solid season. And then we hope St. John's can break through in the Big East, maybe even this evening against Georgetown, which comes your way. I think, let me figure out what time the game is tonight. Is it 6:30? Okay, 6:30. So coming up just a little while from now, big game, 11-4 St. John's against 10-5 Georgetown. Big game right off the bat here as they get a little deeper into the conference schedule. Now we'll be back and on the Fan in just a couple of minutes, so stay tuned for that.
Mike's on. He's ready to go on the Fan. New York Sports Radio. Mike's on. Mike's on. He'll get you the sports any way that he can. It's Mike Francesa on the Fan. Sports Radio 66 WFAN.
On this Wednesday evening, it's Mike's on, Francesa on the Fan. As we get ready to usher in a new era in Giants football, I can see here come the Judge headlines now as the Giants tomorrow at 2 o'clock will introduce their new head coach. Now, they've done this a few too many times in recent years. Now, I know that the owners hope and pray that they don't have to do this again for a while because it has happened way too often. And when you're introducing head coaches, it means there's a reason for it. And the reason has been that they can't win any games, which is why they continue to have to go out and change head coaches. So now they go to New England, they turn to New England. And let's be honest, although it's hard to knock anything New England does, one thing they have not done is produce very successful guys leaving the Belichick tree. They have not done well at all. Go back to Charlie Weiss and Romeo. Take it from there. Mangini, who should have been a very successful head coach. That's the one that I really, really look and say it should not have worked out that way. If I go back to the years he was here, the fatal mistakes he made with the Jets, forget the one which I think he regrets the most, which was severing his ties with Belichick, because that has probably hurt him most around the league. But the way he handled things with the owner, which is why instead of being in good position, having 2 winning years and 3 years on the job, he was out of a job because his team went from 8-3 to 9-7, and the owner was fed up with him. So he quickly jumps into a second job that had no chance for success. Instead of waiting and knowing that second one is so important. And that's one thing you have to learn. If you're a head coach and you fail the first time and you really believe you are a good head coach, take your time. That's the thing that Belichick did. Belichick failed in Cleveland because the circumstances did not allow him to be successful. Not that he wasn't good, but the circumstances did not allow him to be successful. But he waited. He went back. He got back into the Parcells family, went to New England for the year. Wasn't even a coordinator that year when the Pats went to the Super Bowl. He was a guy who did a little bit of everything, did a lot with the defense, but Al Groh was the coordinator. Was with the team, then came back to the Jets as the coordinator. So it was years before he stepped back out as a head coach. And yes, he struggled early when he went back to Foxborough, and we know the rest is history. But the point is, if you jump right back in and take the worst and the first terrible offer that comes, if you fail in that second time, you're not getting a third shot. And I have no doubt in my mind that if somebody would turn around right now, and it's not going to happen, but if somebody would turn around and give Eric Mangini a chance to be the head coach of a team right now, he'd be ultra successful. I have no doubt. Absolutely no doubt. Because he's learned what he needed to learn. He was very young in the beginning. And he did some things that young coaches do arrogantly. He made some mistakes, and they weren't even football mistakes. They were non-football mistakes. But it cost him dearly, and it's cost him the career he should have had. So now Judge steps in for 2 guys who really weren't cut out to be head coaches, probably anywhere, but certainly here. The last 2 Giant head coaches were woefully inadequate in a lot of different ways. Even though the first one had an 11-5 season, they still were inadequate. And Sherman's a nice guy. I know he left my program and everything else, and it is quite ironic that anyone who's ever left the Mike and the Malik show or my program, a coach who's not fulfilled his responsibilities as, part of the deal that he agrees to, every one of those guys has been fired or hasn't finished the season. 4 for 4. I said that as it happened, and it turned out to happen again. But it didn't happen because he quit us. It happened because it was emblematic of everything that was wrong. And the losing continued. That's why he gets fired. We don't fire coaches. Nobody in the media fires coaches. Owners fire coaches for losing. But it can be a slippery slope when you're also fighting a battle in the media every day. Now, Mike McCarthy jumped in today with his baby blues on, showed up in Dallas, sat between the Joneses, all smiles, as he became the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, moving into the monster franchise, knowing that he is now in the middle. He's the ringmaster of the biggest circus in all the sports. Let's hear what he had to say.
First of all, thank you. It is great.
4 minutes of McCarthy.
And, I'm having a moment here because I don't know where the hell to put my hands. I never sat at a table for a press conference, so excuse me. Second thing, I should have brought my typed copy of notes like Jerry did. I was trying to be slick and slip this in on you. But no, I just want to say thank you to so many different people. But I will start off with, this past year has been a year of reflection. My wife said I won't make it through 10 words. I think I got to about 6. But reflection of just what a blessed man I am. Great moments that I've been a part of. I'm married to the love of my wife. My wife is the love of my life. We have beautiful children, come from a blessed family, and professionally was able to lift the Lombardi Trophy. But I do need to tell a story about Saturday night when I was here on the interview. And here I am sitting across the table, Stephen, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jr., Will McClay, Todd Williams, and Jerry's telling a story about the purchase of the Dallas Cowboys. And at the end of the story, he leans over to me and he grabs me by the forearm and reaches out to shake my hand. He says, "And you need to be the coach of the Dallas Cowboys." So I jumped up and hugged him, but and I'll stop right there. We had a hell of a time. Just say that. But no, that's a moment. That's a moment, and that's a story I'll be telling the rest of my life. So I can't just tell you how thrilled my family and I are here, thrilled to be here. So, and I can't get over this place because when I was given the directions and the itinerary of where everything was at, I just realized now where the Ford Center is, because the Star is so big. I mean, this is an unbelievable facility, but the reality of it is you don't just see it, you feel it, and that's something that's real for everybody that has a chance to walk through these doors. And I just want to tell you, the importance and the understanding of how to protect and be the steward of this iconic franchise. I'm really looking forward to doing that. This past year has been a gift. It's been a gift in a lot of ways. It's been a gift for my family and I, Jessica, our children. But it's been a gift with a purpose. And that purpose, for me personally, was to be a better husband, a better father, and fortunately had the time to work on being a better coach. So I'm really thrilled once again about this opportunity. And I just want to say, my family is my team, and my team is excited to be here and be part of the Dallas Cowboys.
1 minute.
Family and football. It's great to see smiling Randall over there. He still looks like he's 20 years old when he arrived in Green Bay. But family and football, as we've always talked about, was always the approach and always the focus. And you find out right away that everything in this organization starts and finishes with the Jones family. So a big thank you to Jerry and Stephen, Jerry Jr., the whole
30.
Jones family for once again for this great opportunity. And lastly, I'm just going to say this and to the fans, and the commitment will be unwavering. But I won my first Super Bowl here in North Texas at AT&T.
10 seconds.
And I just want to tell you, I am anxious and excited to get to work on winning the next Super Bowl for the Dallas Cowboys. Thank you. It's a thrill to be here.
There's a very happy Mike McCarthy, the new head coach, and I think a good fit for that team. He's a veteran head coach, knows his way around the league, knows his way around his staff. He doesn't have to grow into his job, and he's got a team that's ready to win now. So I think it is a good match because, some young coaches, like the Giants are going to deal with tomorrow, those coaches have to put a staff together, and they have to get used to running a staff and get used to running a team and doing things for the first time as a head coach. And there is a learning curve there. There's going to be for any head coach. Every head coach after his first year will change things. That's just the way it is. McCarthy doesn't have to do that. He's been a head coach for forever. He's won 6 division titles. He's won a Super Bowl. He also was in Green Bay. The only thing bigger than being in Green Bay, because the Packers are an iconic franchise, is to be in Dallas, where the Cowboys are obviously an iconic franchise. And you can always hear when a guy goes in and takes over the Cowboys, or takes over the Yankees, or takes over the Celtics, or takes over the Montreal Canadiens, you can almost hear it in their voice when they do. Because, you know what? There's something extra. There's something special about those franchises. There's something iconic about those franchises. They matter. It doesn't mean they're going to win more. Doesn't mean they have any advantages. What it means is that they just are. these special franchises. It's just the way it is. And you can see how it impacts the guys who step in and take the job. And you can almost hear that in McCarthy's voice today. It is a little bigger. It is a little more imposing in Dallas. But then you look and see, and you realize that they haven't won in forever. Back after this. Tomorrow is Joe Judge's day in New York. Obviously, the 38-year-old will come in and be named the Giant head coach. Very big day for him. 38 years old, never a head coach on any level. Obviously, he's been around successful programs in Alabama and in New England. So it's not like he hasn't had experience. It's not like he hasn't been around plenty of winning and been around, obviously, good football minds and be around top players. So that's obvious that all that's true. But now he has a couple of tough chores. One is, the toughest of all, is putting together a staff. That is the hardest thing to do now. As a matter of fact, I've had veteran head coaches tell me that one of the reasons they have stopped thinking about coming back is it is that much of a pain in the neck to put a staff together. Now, when you look at this, if they honestly allow him to pick his own staff, as I've heard they're going to, which I hope is the case. I don't know that it will be the case. Because you say that you aren't going to get involved and you're going to let him. But remember, some of these guys come with higher price tags than other. I don't know how much the Giants are paying Judge for the head coaching job. But you now have to slide assistants in a league where there are assistants who get paid over $1 million. Some teams don't want to pay their assistants a lot of money. Paying your assistants is a big part of it. I'll give you an example. If I were Judge, and I'll be interested to see how he plays this, I would have one young, dynamic. See, he's not, one thing I like is, I don't think he's going to be either the guy who's going to be the guy who spearheads the offense or the defense, which I like. I like the fact that he's not going to be tied in and just lasered into one side of the ball. That's something that, despite his success, Rex Ryan never got away from on the defensive side. Rex Ryan, a lot of times, was more concerned that his defensive prowess stood out than he was about what his team did. Conversely, how many times do you see guys who get so hung up in their play calling and in the offense that they forget about clock management, game situations, special team decisions, who should be playing and who shouldn't, what's happening with the coaches, what's happening with the players. So there is, if you have a guy who understands, now my job as head coach is, I'm not just in charge of any one part of this, I'm in charge of all of it. And the guys who are good head coaches are in charge of all of it. They have input into every part of the deal. Now, you can be a McVay. Now, McVay's moving away from Phillips in Los Angeles. For a couple of years, he gave him the defense. And when you bring a guy in like that, you'll give him the defense, but that doesn't mean that you don't also have some say in what they're about. So let's say he wanted to bring in a very talented offensive play call, like North Turner, as an example. First of all, he's going to be expensive. Secondly, he's got a way of doing things. So you would have to already, if you were the young coach, in my mind, you would have already have to say, I like the way he calls a game. I like his philosophy, and that's what I want to do. I want to be simply like when Norv was in Dallas, they had basically about 6 plays. They ran everything off those plays. They won championships running that. They ran everything off the lead draw. They didn't have a lot of pass routes, but they were coldly and brilliantly efficient with Hall of Famers throughout the entire lineup. They had the right backs. They had the right offensive linemen. They had the accurate quarterback. They had the big receivers. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they did it. But what he would do is run it, with power and then throw it with power, which means take shots down the field. I think the Giants are tailor-made to have that kind of team. I think they can have that team with Jones. Now, the game has become more nuanced than that. I understand that in the passing game. But you don't have to play that way. When you have a back like they have, and you have a quarterback who can get the ball down the field, as Daniel Jones has showed us that he can, they have, and a tight end who has, if he can stay healthy, great explosion. And they have one wide receiver who came into his own this year as a rookie, and others who are highly capable. They're not bad in that area. I could see Turner fitting very well. Now, I don't know that there's a relationship there. I don't know if he has any interest in that. I don't know if the Giants want to pay him. I don't know anything about that. But to me, that would work. I think what Norv brings to an offense would be perfect for what their personnel says. I think it would be a superb fit. So I'll be very fascinated to see. And I'll learn a lot just by the staff he puts together in terms of how much experience is on the staff, how much he thinks he can trust the staff, how much new thinking he wants to bring to the staff. Because there's two things about the assistants. One, you can't coach the coaches. You have got to believe your coaches get what you want and can go out and instruct the players without you having to coach them. If you have to coach them, you're dead. Number two, you don't want coaches that are going to get you fired. You're a young coach. You don't want coaches who are going to be problems. You don't want coaches who are going to be subversive. You don't want coaches who aren't going to get the message. So the staff you put together is critical. And it's the first statement you really make as a young head coach. And the league's watching. Not only is ownership watching, the league's watching. And the league's is going to understand a lot by where you go to get these guys. Are some of them coming from outside the league? Are a lot of them coming from guys you know well? Are they strangers? Do they have resumes? So the staff they put together, which is a very hard part of doing this job now. Mike McCarthy admitted he spent the entire offseason, the entire year recruiting his staff. The entire year. Judge hasn't had that luxury. But if he's quick on his feet, since the minute he got the job, he's got a plan. As a matter of fact, when he was here, he probably should have been able to tell you, I can put my hands on this guy, and this guy. Because that's one of the first questions you're going to ask as an owner. If you're not doing your job. Because it's one of the biggest parts. Not just because you're dealing with it from a management standpoint where you're worried about a budget. And bringing assistant coaches to New York is as difficult as bringing in between free agents to New York. Because what happens is their wives Google the good school systems. And then they find out that they can't afford the houses in any of the good school system where all the school districts are that are good, that are close to where they play and where their practice facility is. They can't live anywhere because they can't touch houses in any of them. Then they complain to their husbands, we can't live here. You have to pay more for assistants here. And I know free agents who have left for that reason, and I know assistants who haven't come here for that reason. So in this town, it's even more difficult. And I know guys who, when the Jets were at Hofstra, lived 80 miles away and drove it because their wives wanted their kids in certain school districts that they could afford, and they made their husbands drive 80 miles to work. So that stuff goes on. And a lot of times they'll be, Coach, I can't afford. I want to come for you and be part of your staff, but I can't afford to live there. So that becomes a big issue here, bigger here than in just about anywhere. I'm sure it's the same way in LA. I'm sure it's the same way in San Francisco. But that is a big factor here with the Giants and the Jets with their assistant coaches. It happens all the time. I know I've been around it. I know it happens all the time. Because think about it. You Google the school districts that come up and then see what the houses cost in those neighborhoods. And then you see, wait a second, I can't afford that on assistant's coach salary. So that's where the salaries have to go up if you want to get your man. And that's why you don't want to be left with a terrible coaching staff. So that becomes, as you watch this tomorrow and you watch it unfold the first couple of days, see exactly if A, he mentions a lot about staff, and B, he lands the guys that he has targeted. Because doing it is not as easy as you think, especially in our neck of the woods. It is a big problem, and it has cost both teams big free agents. I know that for a fact. That they left and said, oh, my wife went crazy over the real estate and this and that. Real estate's really expensive. School districts are a big issue. And getting assistants, and you need them, is a big part of that. And that's just some of the headaches that a new coach finds himself when he comes into this town. So you hear about the media, but you don't hear about little things like real estate prices and how much assistants make and school districts, but that's a big part of it, a very, very big part of it, and one a young coach knows all about and he'll have to deal with right away if he hasn't dealt with it in the last couple of days, once he knew he was going to get the job. So we'll be watching to see tomorrow how all this unfolds and learn right away. We'll take a big step. We'll know where the Giants are, how much they believe in this coach in terms of giving him some latitude, where he might have been given enough money. He might not have been given the crazy contract that Matt Rule got. You know he hasn't been. But will the Giants put enough money on the table so that he can at least recruit the assistants he wants and afford them if they want to come here and deal with him? Because that can become a very, very tricky and expensive proposition for a head coach, especially a young head coach, especially a head coach who hasn't done this before. That's a part of the job you don't hear a lot about, but it is a big, big barrier to guys coming here. If their wives aren't happy, they're not happy. And sometimes they don't come for that reason. So that'll be a very big part of what happens in the days to come. So there's a lot of things that this young coach will have put right in front of him. Media will be one. The ones I just mentioned will be another. And how he handles them be fun to watch. But tomorrow, it's about him. We'll talk more about it tomorrow night. Enjoy your evening, everybody.